So now, yesterday we looked at the first part. Now, the second part about the studies. So, we'll start with the post cardiac arrest. So, three famous trials were there. The HACA trial, which was mild therapeutic hypothermia to improve the neurological outcome after cardiac arrest. Then the TTM trial, and then the recent was the VSC trial. So the design was in the first two trials, that is the TTM and the HACA trial. Hypothermia was instituted after the spontaneous circulation was achieved. In HACA trial, 32 to 34 degree versus normothermia was compared, whereas in the TTM trial, 33 and 36 degree were compared. In VSC trial, it was vasopressin, steroid and epinephrine, which was given during CPR. Now these two were after you have achieved your ROSC, but this was during CPR, and they compared this with saline and epinephrine. So vasopressin and steroid versus saline was the study, and they were all multicenter randomized trials. Now if you look at the results of HACA and TTM, now this is about HACA. They showed that there is a favorable neurological outcome if you institute hypothermia after ROSC, and the death rate was also lower in this population. Whereas in the TTM trial, the primary outcome, which was death, and secondary outcome in terms of the neurological function, modified Rankin score and death, they were all non-significant. So again, the discussion whether 32 was better or 34 is better or 33 is better or 36 is better. Now there are many trials which have shown that there is no point in going down to 33 degrees centigrade, and 36 degree is sufficient enough. So basically you don't institute a severe degree of hypothermia for these patients, right? So the HACA concluded that among patients in whom spontaneous circulation has been restored after cardiac arrest due to VF, systemic cooling to a bladder temperature of 32 to 34 for 24 hours increased the chances of survival and a favorable neurological outcome, which was done by the CPC score, that is cerebral performance category scoring. Whereas the TTM said it does not, that the trial does not provide evidence that getting the temperature down to 33 degrees centigrade it gives any benefit to the patient who has an out of hospital cardiac arrest as compared to 36 degrees centigrade. Then came the VSC trial, where they looked at vasopressin, steroid and epinephrine, and again if you looked at the hemodynamics part, only the hemodynamics part was much better in the VSC group, obviously when you are giving vasopressin along with epinephrine as compared to the steroid group. And when you look at the cumulative survival of patients, right, that was, and the patients after post resuscitation shock. Now patients, if you cumulate all patients in the VSC trial, it was not significant. But after achieving ROSC, if the patients had shock and they fell into the VSC group, that patients have a better survival. Remember that. So this was the VSC trial, that if after achieving ROSC there was no shock in the patient and they were given vasopressin, they did not confer any mortality benefit. But after the resuscitation, if the patients had shock and vasopressin was and steroid was administered, there was a mortality benefit in that subgroup. So they concluded that patients requiring vasopressors, combined vasopressin, epinephrine and methylprednisolone during CPR and stress dose hydrocortisone in post resuscitation shock compared with the placebo group resulted in improved survival to hospital discharge plus favorable neurological outcomes. So there were two outcomes that they were looking at. One was the mortality benefit and the other was neurological outcome. So hypothermia after ROSC, the temperature target should be 36. Now there are many trials and there is no point in going down to 33. And during CPR, vasopressin, epinephrine, methylprednisolone offers better neurological outcome, but still they have not been incorporated into ACLS. So as a practice, as a documentation wise, you have to write what ACLS says, right? Although the trial had different views, let's see what the next ACLS does. They take into account the findings of the VSC trial. Then traumatic brain injury. Many trials, but the best few trials were the BEST TRIP trial, where they looked at is there any role of intracranial pressure monitoring, the DECRA trial, the famous DECRA trial about decompressive hemicraniectomy. Almost on the similar lines was the rescue ICP trial, and then the Eurotherm trial, where they looked at the hypothermia in traumatic brain injury. The BEST trial was a randomized trial, and they compared ICP versus the clinical and radiological management. And the primary outcome was they were looking at survival time, impaired consciousness and functional status at 3 months and 6 months, and neuropsychological status at 6 months. And what they found was that the primary outcome between the pressure monitoring group and the imaging clinical examination, the ICE group, there was no difference. Even the Glasgow outcome scale was not different. So basically what they concluded was that in traumatic brain injury, ICP monitoring does not change the outcome, right? There was no advantage in terms of cumulative survival. It was not significant. The Eurotherm trial, again, they looked at ICP of more than 20, and they were either given standard ICP reduction methods or they were instituted hypothermia, and the primary outcome was same, extended Glasgow Coma scale at 6 months. And what they found was that for unfavorable outcome, the primary analysis, if you look at the hazard rate, was statistically significant in terms of hypothermia. But they said that otherwise, when you cumulatively you look at it, hypothermia plus standard care did not result in better outcome than those with standard care alone, and that is the reason the BTF, the Brain Trauma Foundation, does not look at hypothermia in any of the traumatic brain injury. Then the two trials which looked at decompressive hemicraniectomy, the DECRA trial and the rescue ICP trial, both compared decompressive craniectomy versus the standard medical care, and the primary outcome was unfavorable outcome, and that was defined as death, severe disability or vegetative state at 6 months, and almost 500 plus patients were enrolled. And if you look at DECRA trial, obviously if you are taking out the skull bone, the ICP reduction will be better as compared to the patient who has the skull bone intact. So yes, ICP reduction was better in the decompressive craniectomy group. The days of mechanical ventilation, the days in the ICU state, they were all lower in the decompressive group. That is all agreeable. Similarly, the rescue ICP also had the same findings. But when you look at the major part, which was death, vegetative state and disability, they were all higher in the decompressive craniectomy group rather than the standard medical group, whether that was rescue ICP or that was DECRA trial, right? They were statistically significant in terms of these groups. And they concluded that in patients with severe diffuse traumatic brain injury, increased ICP that was refractory to the first tier therapy, the use of craniectomy decreased the mean ICP, decreased the duration of ventilator days, decreased the ICU stay, but was associated with a significantly worse outcome at 6 months. This means more disability was there at the end of 6 months. The rescue ICP trial again said it resulted in lower mortality but higher vegetative state and disability state. So more or less the conclusion was same, that probably we are generating more of vegetative patients rather than any advantage in doing a decompressive craniectomy in such patients. Then another trial which was the Destiny 2 trial. Now this was better because the earlier two trials were in traumatic brain injury, decompressive craniectomy in traumatic brain injury. This was decompressive craniectomy in malignant stroke. Right, the subset was different, and this was middle cerebral artery stroke. And what they found was the hemicraniectomy group had a huge survival advantage as compared to the standard medical therapy. And they said early hemicraniectomy significantly increased the probability of survival in patients 60 years and above. But obviously they again had substantial disability at the end of 6 months. But here the survival benefit was huge, and if it is done early in the course of the disease. The other two trials were this CRASH 2 and the STITCH trial. They were both in intracerebral hemorrhage. Right. So here they looked at tranexamic acid and associated complications, and here they looked at early surgery versus the initial conservative treatment. And the CRASH 2 looked at giving within 8 hours of injury tranexamic acid or a matching placebo, and the primary outcome was death within 4 weeks of injury. And what they found was, at the end of the day, tranexamic acid was found to be better in all patients, whether this was from time of injury, if you looked at the systolic blood pressure values, if you compared with GCS or the type of injury. In all patients, tranexamic acid administration group did better when you are looking at the intracerebral hemorrhage. And they found that early administration of tranexamic acid to trauma patients with or at risk of significant bleeding reduces the risk of death from hemorrhage, and it does not increase any vascular occlusion complications. So both the things, it decreases the bleeding and does not increase thrombotic events. The STITCH trial, they looked at early surgery. What is here? Early means hematoma evacuation within 12 hours of randomization versus the initial conservative treatment. And again, the Glasgow Outcome Coma Scale was looked at, and death, vegetative state and severe disability was unfavorable. Moderate disability and good recovery was looked as favorable. And what they found was early surgery versus initial conservative group, they were, in terms of primary outcome, in terms of favorable, unfavorable was not same. But when you looked at death at 6 months, early surgery group had lower death as compared to the initial conservative group, and this was statistically significant. Then in status epilepticus, do you need to do hypothermia, right? So Hibernatus trial was there, and they found there is no advantage of doing hypothermia in status epilepticus, and this hypothermia was instituted once your entire medical therapy has been given and still the patient is in status epilepticus. So in terms of primary outcome or death in hospital and ICU, they did not change even with the institution of hypothermia. So as of now, the hypothermia is not showing any benefit. So ICP monitoring and hypothermia does not have any effect on mortality in traumatic brain injury. So don't institute both. ICP monitoring is a practice of an institution. It is not a mandatory thing that you have to institute ICP in all patients. Yes, there are certain guidelines, but there are all level 2 and level 3 evidences. None of them are level 1 evidence if you look at the Brain Trauma Foundation guidelines. Decompressive craniectomy may reduce death at 6 months, but we are looking at more disability and more vegetative state. So whenever a patient is being looked at that this patient is a candidate for decompressive craniectomy, understand what are we going to give at 6 months. The talk with the attendants has to be very clear that what are we understanding from this part. Tranexamic acid in trauma and early surgical intervention for intracranial hematoma decreases mortality. This was as per CRASH true. And therapeutic hypothermia does not improve the outcome, functional outcome and mortality in status epilepticus. Then how do we feed our patients? So the first question was, and this was in 2011, that should we start parenteral nutrition at what time? Is it early? Is it late? And they compared the European and the American guidelines, and the primary outcome was death and complications. And what they found was the early initiation group had a better discharge from the ICU. But if you look at the other major parameters, that was death in ICU, in hospital, or within 90 days, or nutrition related complications, they were all similar in both the groups. It did not matter whether you started early nutrition or late nutrition, and there was no difference in death from hospital, death from ICU, discharge from hospital, discharge alive, and they were all statistically non-significant regarding the timing of TPN. Then the Eden trial, the famous Eden trial, we looked at the type of feeding. That was the timing of TPN. Now this is the type of feeding. So do you give an initial trophic feed, or do you start with a full enteral feeding in patients with acute lung injury? And here they divided into receiving trophic or full enteral for the first 6 days of mechanical ventilation, and again the outcome was ventilator free days. Here the outcome was different. We were looking at ventilator free days, and what they found was not at all significant. The ventilator free days was statistically same, but whereas if you look at the other failure free days, right? In terms of cardiovascular, renal, hepatic, coagulation, IC3 days, they were all same, mortality was same, infectious complications were same, whether you start a trophic feed or a full enteral feed. And if you look at this part, that full feeding and trophic feeding allied discharge was same. Then the redox trial, basically this was the mortuary for glutamine. The glutamine died after this, right? Yes, there are issues with this trial because here glutamine was given IV and orally, both. Generally in routine practice you don't give both the administration, you practice only one. So here they looked at glutamine and antioxidants both versus placebo, and the primary outcome was mortality, and what they found was glutamine group had a higher mortality. Right, the glutamine group had a p-value of 0.05, so they had a higher mortality at day 28, higher mortality in hospital, higher mortality at 6 months, and everything basically was against glutamine, and this was statistically significant. Then the route of feeding. Does the route make any change? And this was as per the calories trial in 2014 in NEGM, and they either fed through parenteral or enteral route within 36 hours, and the primary outcome was mortality. And what they found was does not make a difference, right? Whether you're looking at death in ICU, hospital, 90 days, or organ failure days, cardiovascular, respiratory, renal, neurological, gastrointestinal, it did not make difference whether these patients were fed by the enteral route or the parenteral route. Again, statistically non-significant. Then how much to feed? Right, so the PERMIT trial came into the picture. Now this was 2015. That do you underfeed these patients or you give a standard enteral feeding? And this was again done in a medical surgical trauma patients, where either they were given 40 to 60% of the calculated caloric requirement, or 70 to 100% of the total feed for 14 days. And again we were looking at 90-day mortality, and what they found was whether you permissively underfeed them or you give a standard feeding, death at 90 days in ICU, at 28 days in hospital, at 180 days, not significant. It does not matter how much amount of feed you are giving to these patients, right? Statistically non-significant. So late parenteral nutrition in critically ill patients associated with fewer side effects and early discharge. This was there. Initial trophic feeding as compared to full enteral feeding does not increase the ventilator free days. So the practice of just give the trophic feed for 6 days, again the evidence doesn't support it. Glutamine administration in critically ill is associated with increased mortality. The trials have confirmed it. The route of feeding does not change the mortality. 40 to 60% of total calorie intake with full protein intake does not increase mortality as compared to the full nutritional goal. So again people have started practicing this kind of feeding because it does not change. Earlier thought was that probably the mortality increases if you are underfeeding such patients. Then the acute ischemic stroke. The first 3 trials were about, these 2 trials were about intravenous thrombolysis. The other 3 trials are about the intra-arterial. So the NINDS trial, the first NIND trial where the efficiency of RTPA was confirmed, right? And the last trial, again it's an intra-arterial Mr. Clean trial. So the NINDS trial was within 3 hours. Now in acute ischemic stroke all trials are time-based trials. So NINDS trial was if the patient presented with an acute stroke within 3 hours, the dose was 0.9 milligram per kg and maximum of 90 milligram. The primary outcome was improvement in the NIHS score 24 hours after the onset, and other complications in terms of bleeding was looked at. And what they found was the patient did better on almost all these scales, whether that was Barthel scale, modified Rankin, Glasgow outcome, NIHS. So at first 90 minutes and then the 90 to 180 minutes, the patient did better on all outcome scales in the RTPA group. The survival, it was same. The survival part did not change if you are giving RTPA or not. Then the ICAS 3 trial, this was the time frame increased. That was up till 3 hours. Now this was 3 to 4.5 hours. Again the dose was same, modified Rankin MRS was looked at, and what they found was the MRS score was better in the altiplase group as compared to the placebo group. The incidence of ICH obviously was higher in the RTPA group as compared to the placebo group, but again the quality of life was better here if you are giving RTPA till 4.5 hours. And they concluded that intravenous altiplase administration 3 to 4.5 hours after the symptoms significantly improved clinical outcome in patients with acute ischemic stroke. Then came Mr. Clean. Now this was patients who had an acute ischemic stroke in the anterior circulation artery, and this was now a little extended time frame up till 6 hours, right? So that was 3, then 3 to 4.5, then up till 6 hours of stroke onset, and here they gave the maximum dose of 90 milligram of altiplase or urokinase, and the primary outcome was again the MRS score at 90 days. And what they found was the ratio that the primary outcome was again better in the intervention group as compared to the control group, and an absolute difference of 13.5% points in the rate of functional independence in favor of intervention. So they said that you can do an intra-arterial thrombolysis even if the patient presents up till 6 hours of stroke. Then recently 2018 two more trials came in looking at this stroke, and they were called as Dawn and Diffuse, and they have changed the way stroke patients are being managed. Basically now they started looking up till 24 hours, right? So the Dawn trial said mechanical thrombectomy 6 to 24 hours after stroke, and Diffuse said thrombectomy at 6 to 16 hours of stroke. So again the time frame increased, and both the trials were multi-center. They looked at thrombectomy versus standard care, and the stroke which presented after 6 hours. Till 6 hours you had Mr. Clean, right? So what to do after 6 hours? So they looked at 6 hours and within 24 hours. What was the indication? Occlusion of intracranial internal carotid artery, the first segment of the middle cerebral artery, or both on a scan, and again disability as per the modified Rankin score. And what they found was huge difference in disability. The Dawn and Diffuse both supported the thrombectomy group, and this was 0.999, and this is not p-value. Remember, these are the p-values. This is the posterior probability of superiority. There's a different statistical analysis. So p-values were much lower, so which supported that you can administer thrombectomy for these patients if you have the 3 subset where you have an internal carotid artery or an anterior circulation stroke. Both Dawn and Diffuse. So RTPA when administered within 3 hours of ischemic stroke results in better functional outcome with no increase in mortality, and this is grade 1A recommendation as per your AHS stroke guidelines. Thrombolysis within 3 to 4.5 hours again produces better neurological outcome with ICH not reaching the significant status. Again, this is also a recommendation. There are 4 more exclusion criteria as compared to the 3-hour criteria. One is age, one is APTT, I think the other is blood glucose, and 4th I don't remember right now. So there are 4 more exclusion criteria. Then intra-arterial thrombolysis up till 6 hours, yes, it can be done with improved functional ability. Thrombectomy for large vessel stroke of 6 to 24 hour duration now has a better outcome in terms of disability as compared to the standard therapy alone. Then the bread and butter of critical care, ventilation. Everything started with the ARTS-NET protocol. Everybody knows about these values, 12 ml and 6 ml, and there was a reduction in mortality, and so it has become a standard of care that we will ventilate all of them with low tidal volume, and we want to target a plateau pressure of less than 30. Then another 2 trials were the LOVES trial, LOVS, and the EXPRESS trial. So in this, the ventilation strategy was low tidal volume, recruitment maneuver, and high PEEP. And here again, PEEP was done in the setting of ALI and ARDS, and they were categorized as tidal volume of less than 6 ml per kg or low levels of PEEP, whereas the intervention group was again tidal volume was less than 6 ml, but the PEEP levels were increased, and the plateau of 40 was targeted here, and the primary outcome was mortality. And what they found in all here, the death In hospital, ICU, ventilation, first 28 days, barotrauma, nothing changed. The only thing which was different, the only thing which was better in the lung open ventilation group was refractory hypoxemia and death with refractory hypoxemia. So episodes of refractory hypoxemia were less in the patients who were given higher PEEP. Rest, nothing was different. Then in the Express trial, similar findings, death rates were same. The only thing that the adjunctive therapies used for refractory hypoxemia were lower in the increased recruitment group, 8.8 versus 18.8. Again, this was the same finding as the Love's trial, and they said that in Love's no significant difference in all-cause mortality or barotrauma. And here also the ventilation and the alveolar recruitment did not significantly reduce mortality. Then about fluid strategy, when how much to give fluid, and now it's a dictum that you want to achieve equivalence of fluid by third day of ventilation. And from where did this came? This came from two trials which were named as the FACT trial. So one was two fluid management strategy and the other was comparison about how to give. So it was PAC versus CVC, and both were randomized trials, and they found that the only difference was the death was fine, but the ventilator free days were higher in the conservative group as compared to the liberal group, and ICU free days were also higher in the conservative group. So conclusion, mortality wise there was no difference. Then the PROSERVA trial which changed the way we ventilate these patients about prone positioning. There were many other trials, prone supine trial, prone supine 1 trial. So earlier trials have been there, but they did not show any mortality benefit. PROSERVA trial was one excellent trial where they looked at proning for at least 16 hours. Right, and what they found was mortality difference, 16% in the prone group versus 32% in the supine group, so almost double the advantage, right? So mortality at 28 days was much lower in the prone grouping. Similarly, at 90 days it was lower. Ventilator free days were higher in the prone group as compared to the supine group, and cumulative probability of survival 0.001, statistically significant. About the practice of giving muscle relaxants. Now in severe ARDS, early ARDS you give muscle relaxants, and this came from the Accuracies trial where they looked at cis atracurium was given for first 48 hours in patients with severe ARDS where the PF ratios were on the lower side, and they compared mortality and ICU acquired paresis, and what they found was death at 28 days was 0.05, whereas in ICU and hospital was not significant. Number of ventilator free days were higher in the cis atracurium group, and ICU acquired paresis was not different. So just administering for 48 hours, it did not increase the incidence of ICU acquired paresis in these patients. The two trials, Oscar Oscillate, before this people were offering HFOB now, but after these two trials the management of high frequency oscillatory ventilation has gone down. The Oscar trial said it did not show any mortality benefit, whereas the Oscillate trial rather was even worse, where it showed that HFOB increases mortality 0.005 in the 47 versus 35%. So after Oscillate and Oscar trial, HFOB has gone down. The ART trial, ART trial, the recent trial, 2017 JAMA trial, where they looked at lung recruitment with titrated PEEP versus low PEEP in patients with ARDS, and this was a multicentric trial. Control group was offered low PEEP, and the experimental group was offered recruitment strategy and then a decremental PEEP strategy, and primary outcome was mortality at 28 days, and what they found was death 0.04. So the death rate was lower in the low PEEP group, not in the higher PEEP group. The recruitment strategy group had a higher mortality. Secondary outcome, that is death in ICU hospital 6 months, was same. Length of stay was all same. The number of ventilator free days were little higher in the lung recruitment strategy, but the pneumothorax incidence was also higher in the recruitment strategy group. So the mortality was statistically low in the low PEEP group. Now this is the PREVENT trial, a recent trial. What it looked at what is the effect of low versus intermediate tidal volume strategy on ventilator free days in patients who are not having ARDS? So what they looked at was patients who were admitted post-operatively and who are expected to ventilate at least for 24 hours. They enrolled these patients in this, and they looked at low tidal volume was 6 ml per kg, and they gradually decreased by 1 ml per kg per hour to 4 ml per kg. And the intermediate group was, they started at 10 ml per kg per hour, and the target was P plat of less than 25 centimeters of water, and the primary outcome was ventilator free days at 28 days. And what they found was the ventilator free days did not change in any of the group. Similarly, the ICU length of stay, hospital length of stay, and mortality and development of ARDS was also similar in both the strategies. So what the benchmark was not actually the tidal volume, the benchmark was plateau pressure in the second group also. So again, whether it is 6 or 10, again that's a different story, but plateau pressures should not cross 25 centimeters of water, and that is what is probably preventing or helping these patients in not developing ARDS. The TrackMan trial was about the timing of tracheostomy, that do you do an early or late tracheostomy. Early was within 4 days, late was 10 days and later, and again the status of discharge and from the hospital and from the ICU was similar. There was no difference whether we are doing it early or late. Then recent trial, 2018 EOLA trial. Extracorporeal membrane oxygenation for severe ARDS, and here they looked at the venous ECMO versus the conventional therapy in severe ARDS, and the primary outcome was mortality at 60 days. The primary outcome at 60 days 0.09. Yes, the reduction was there in the VV ECMO group, but not reaching statistical significance. The secondary endpoint, which was treatment failure, this was all better. So that was mortality at 90 days was better, length of stay in the ICU, in the hospital, ventilator free days, vasopressor free days, they were all more or less similar, but at 90 days, the mortality was lower in the VV ECMO group as compared to the other group. But if you look at the primary endpoint, that was not statistically significant, 0.07. So, ventilate with low tidal volume and target is plateau pressures. High PEEP does not give any mortality benefit, but yes, it decreases the hypoxemic events. High PEEP with recruitment increases mortality. Conservative fluid strategy should be there because it allows us to have more mechanically ventilator free days and try to target euvolemia by the third day of your ventilation. Prone ventilation when you are prolonging it. So the important key point is hours, 16 hours or more, it decreases mortality. Neuromuscular blockers, if they are given for a short duration, that is within for first 48 hours, in severe ARDS, it decreases mortality and does not increase the side effects. HFOV, it requires further validation. Yes, there are certain studies we still support, but again, as far as the two major trials, they don't support the use of HFOV as of now. Timing of tracheostomy has no effect on mortality or ventilator free days. In patients without ARDS, low tidal volume strategy did not result in a greater number of ventilator free days. But remember, the catch point here was again plateau pressure. They did not allow the plateau pressures to go high. VV ECMO for severe ARDS decreases mortality but not of statistical significance at 6 months. High flow nasal cannula, two major trials with high flow nasal cannula. One was the Florali and the other was the pre-oxyflow trial. One compared this with non-invasive ventilation in acute hypoxemic respiratory failure. The other looked at comparing it during intubation, that do you prevent hypoxemic events when you are intubating these patients. So this was NIV versus HFNC in patients who progressed to invasive ventilation, and this was HFNC versus high flow mask in pre-anesthesia induction phase. And what they found was, in overall population, in Florali trial, it did not matter whether you were giving NIV or standard oxygen or HFNC. But in patients who had an PF ratio on the lower side, less than 200, that group did better if HFNC was given. So, if you look at the cumulative survival, this was significant in terms of patients who had low PF ratio. When you talk about pre-oxyflow, it did not change the events of lowest SpO2 during procedure or death or mortality at 28 days. It was same whether high flow was used or high flow face mask was, that is nasal cannula was used or high flow face mask was used, and that was not significant in terms. So HFNC does not decrease the intubation rates as compared to NIV, but it has a better survival advantage if they are continued on HFNC, and the events of hypoxemia are less when HFNC is used for pre-oxygenation. Thank you.